tonight on NewsCenter. A flurry of diplomacy to curb North Korean provocations. President Park will hold a series of meetings with her U.S., Japanese, and Chinese counterparts in Washington on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit. With 15 days left until voting day, analysts watching the contest say 24 key battleground districts, most of them in and around the Seoul metropolitan area, will likely determine the outcome of the 20th National Assembly election. And this story very much in development. What we're learning of the hijacked Egyptian airliner, which was forced to land in Cyprus. Mixed reports, conflicting numbers. We have the latest. NewsCenter begins right now. It is 9 a.m. in Washington, 4 p.m. in Cyprus, and 10 on a Tuesday night here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to our viewers all across the globe. You're watching Arirang News Center. A flurry of summit diplomacy awaits President Park when she lands in Washington later this week to attend the Nuclear Security Summit. On the sidelines of the NSS, the South Korean leader will hold a series of bilateral and trilateral summit talks with her U.S., Japanese, and Chinese counterparts to keep the heat on North Korea for its recent provocations. Our Song Ji-sun, who will be traveling with the president, files this report.
Before the official programs begin at the Nuclear Security Summit on Thursday, President Park Geun-hye will kick off the day by holding one-on-one talks with U.S. President Barack Obama. The two will then be joined by Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe for a trilateral summit, where the leaders will discuss North Korea's nuclear issues. President Park and Prime Minister Abe have also set aside time for bilateral talks. It will be their first face-to-face meeting since the leaders met in Seoul in November last year to iron out the details of a landmark agreement on Japan's wartime sexual slavery issue, which was sealed the following month. Before heading to a reception for the Nuclear Security Summit, President Park will speak with her Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Officials say the two will hold in-depth talks on North Korea. The following day, the South Korean leader will sit down with recently elected Argentinian President Mauricio Macri in Washington. Prior to returning to Seoul, President Park will make a short visit to Mexico for a summit with her Mexican counterpart, Enrique Peña Nieto. She will ask both Latin American leaders for their support in strictly and effectively implementing international sanctions on North Korea.
The president will stress the danger posed by North Korea's nuclear development. She will also urge the international community to work together to ensure Pyongyang's denuclearization.
Given that this is the first multilateral summit since North Korea's fourth nuclear test and a long-range missile launch, President Park will look to gather as much international support as she can to steer North Korea away from its nuclear ambitions. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Well, the South Korean leaders' back-to-back summits on the margins of the Nuclear Security Summit will be the first of such kind since the UN Security Council slapped tough sanctions on North Korea. Experts say NSS Washington will serve as a stage to put more pressure on Pyongyang by demonstrating that the most relevant countries stand united over the sanctions and highlight the fact that China is cooperating as well. Connie Kim has an analysis.
North Korea's nuclear issues will be at the center of trilateral talks between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in Washington on Thursday. Dealing with Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program has become an imminent issue following the heaviest UN sanctions slapped on the North this month as a result of its nuclear and long-range missile tests. Experts say the trilateral meeting is significant in that it'll be the country's first three-way security summit.
Japan and South Korea doesn't have a formal information sharing agreement. This could be a good, an opportune moment for the two countries to work with the United States to come up with an approach for reaching that agreement.
Cooperation on a bilateral level will also be sought during separate summits between Seoul and Tokyo and Seoul and Beijing. When South Korean President Park Geun-hye and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe sit down for talks, The two are expected to call for full implementation of the so-called Comfort Women Resolution reached in December last year. Tokyo has been denying its forced mobilization of Korean women into wartime sexual slavery, hindering faithful implementation of the landmark deal. There is also a possibility Abe could rehash the issue of removing a Comfort Woman statue located in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. During her meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Park is set to put forth efforts to mend tense Seoul-Beijing ties. Seoul had pushed for China's active role in putting pressure on Pyongyang after its fourth nuclear test, while Beijing emphasized dialogue in resolving tensions on the peninsula. The two countries also remain divided on the issue of a U.S. anti-missile defense system being placed in South Korea. The trilateral and bilateral summits will be closely watched as they could influence relations between the four countries as well as developments on the Korean peninsula. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
With the April 13th general election quickly approaching, South Korea's political parties are busy refining their messages to the public. Our political correspondent Chi Myung-gil zooms in on their activities planned for the campaign trail.
The ruling Saenuri Party held its first campaign committee meeting on Tuesday. The 5 members, including party chair Kim Moo-sung, vowed to focus their campaign message on national security and revitalizing the economy through job creation.
The Saenuri Party must listen to what the people want. The top priority is national security and job creation. Also, our economy cannot recover if our security is threatened.
Stepping up its campaign efforts, the main opposition Minju Party of Korea's interim leader Kim Jong-in headed to Busan, located in the conservative stronghold of Gyeongsang-namdo province. There, he met with candidates to explain the party's message on economic issues. The co-leader of the minor opposition People's Party, An Chol-soo, vowed to take responsibility if the party fails to win 20 seats in parliament, which would allow the party to form a negotiation bloc.
As the party's leader and the person spearheading the race, I will take full responsibility for the outcome of the election results.
Earlier in the day, the party reprimanded one of its candidates for trying to make a deal with a Minju Party candidate running in the same district. The party reiterated it is against forming alliances with other parties for the election, which would undermine An's goal of transforming Korea into a multi-party system. With the campaign heating up, there's no telling if any of the other candidates will try the same thing. But political analysts note that the unofficial deadline for forging an alliance is April 4th, when the National Election Commission starts printing the ballots for the election. Chi Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Well, battle lines are being drawn, and there are already a number of key races that are currently too close to call. History has shown it's these races, which are normally won by the smallest of margins, that could determine the outcome of the parliamentary elections. Kwon Jang-ho explains.
24 key battlegrounds have been identified across the country that are expected to swing the balance of the upcoming parliamentary elections. In the 2012 elections, the winning margin in these races were less than 3%. Although this time the ruling Saenuri Party has an advantage with a split opposition, there are still expected to be many similarly close finishes, as well as several rematches between candidates. The first notable rematch will be in the Seoul district of Seodaemun-bi between the Saenuri's Chung Do-won and the Minju Party's Kim Yong-ho, who are going up against each other for the third election running. Last time, Chung beat out Kim by just 625 votes, a difference of about 0.9%. Another battle with less than 1% margin was between the Minju Party's Bang Hong-gun and the Saenuri Party's Kang Dong-ho. Park beat Kang by 854 votes, and they'll be facing off again this year. A normally hotly contested district is Nongwon-bi, where Kwon Young-jin and Woo Won-sik battled it out for alternating wins over 3 elections, with an average vote difference of just 3.2%. Although we won't see the two battles again this year, it is still expected to be a close race with a new Saenuri candidate Hong Bong-sik. In the 2012 elections, the Saenuri party won 152 seats out of 300, a majority but only 2. So every race counts, as the future majority of Korea's National Assembly hangs in the balance. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Official campaigning period for those running in the April 13th general election begins in 2 days, on Thursday, that is, and as a big day inches closer, candidates are dotting the I's and crossing the T's on their campaign tactics to win the hearts of the voters. Our Shim Se-min tells us some of the do's and don'ts when it comes to campaign guidelines.
With the official start of the 13-day campaign period on Thursday, the candidates will be out on the street, at local restaurants and at traditional markets, greeting voters and shaking hands. 944 candidates are running in this year's general election for seats in 253 districts nationwide. But as they pound the pavement, they will be following a list of guidelines set by the National Election Commission for what and what not to do during the campaigning period. Here's a breakdown of the rules. Candidates and their supporters can get their message out to voters via text, tweets, and online posts on social media. Flyers, the size of a 9 by 5 centimeter business card with the candidate's name, photo, and campaign pledges are permitted, but the card can't be any bigger than that. The cards can't be passed out on the bus, subway, or other forms of public transportation. Posters are okay, but the images can't include any photos of the candidate with a child or children. In Korea, candidates often use campaign trucks to deliver speeches in target neighborhoods, and this year they can do this starting Thursday from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. Campaigning is not permitted on Election Day, and that includes all of the above, which means it's allowed only until 24 hours before the election day. Aside from that, there is one last rule. Candidates can make donations during the campaign period, but only for something he or she started doing 4 years prior to the election. They're also allowed to contribute to natural disaster relief funds in the event of an emergency. This is to prevent candidates from giving out money or valuables to win support. The 13-day campaign period may seem short, especially for those entering the race for the first time, but
with the kinds of technology we have, Twitter, Facebook, text messages, there's never not enough time for the candidates to campaign, as long as they make the best of it.
Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The tense hijacking and hostage situation aboard an EgyptAir plane finally came to an end with the arrest of the suspect. Now this after a standoff that lasted more than 5 hours. Hwang Ho-jun has the latest.
An end to the nightmare. The Cypriot Foreign Ministry announced that the hijacker aboard EgyptAir flight MS-181 has been arrested and taken into custody by local authorities. The 7 remaining hostages who were held by the suspect have all been safely released. The half-day-long hostage standoff began early Tuesday when the EgyptAir plane en route to Cairo from Alexandria was suddenly diverted to Cyprus, where it was landed after it was taken over by Saif Eldin Mustafa. Initial reports stated 81 passengers were on board, but the Egyptian government later corrected the number to 55, in addition to 7 crew members and 1 EgyptAir security member. Although most passengers were released right away, 3 foreign passengers, the pilot, co-pilot, and 2 cabin crew members remained captive until the hijacker's arrest. The Egyptian Prime Minister said authorities would question Mustafa to find out the motives for his actions. The Egyptian government is working to get a plane to depart from Cairo to Larnaca as soon as possible to return all the passengers. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
North Korea has fired a short-range projectile from an area near its eastern coast in what appears to be another weapons test, seen as a response to ongoing military drills between Seoul and Washington and yet another armed protest against tough international sanctions imposed on the regime over its latest nuclear test and long-range rocket launch. The South Korean military is keeping a close eye and remain on their toes for any future provocations by the North. Our defense correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry said Tuesday that a projectile was fired from Wonsan, Gangwon province and flew around 200 kilometers, hitting a land target. Experts believe the North conducted the firing to test the accuracy of its newly developed 300mm multiple rocket launcher. The ministry says it is closely monitoring related developments and maintaining a high level of readiness.
Since North Korea has recently made various threats, the ministry is seeking countermeasures against all eventualities.
Earlier in the day, the ministry also pointed out that there has been a rise in North Korean drone activities along the western front line. However, it reiterated that the military is well prepared to handle any drones that cross the border. South Korean military is currently implementing a system to track and take down drones that cross into South Korean territory. South Korea's foreign ministry has also urged citizens to take special caution when traveling near the Chinese-North Korea border. The warning, which was specifically issued to local news organizations, comes after the government received intelligence of a possible North Korean terrorist attack or abduction of South Korean journalists and missionaries in the area. Reporters are being advised to carry a media visa and refrain from suspicious activity. Tensions are expected to remain high for the foreseeable future as the regime continues its provocative rhetoric and threats of more weapons tests. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Japan has enacted controversial laws allowing Japanese troops to fight on foreign soil for the first time since the end of World War II. The new security laws passed last September after chaotic scenes in the Japanese parliament reinterpreted the country's pacifist constitution to enable Japan to exercise collective self-defense or coming to the aid of the U.S. and other allies in overseas conflicts. Kwon So-ah reports.
For the first time in more than 7 decades, Japanese troops will be permitted to fight in overseas conflicts. The new security law, which was passed in September and took effect Tuesday, loosens post-World War II constraints on Japan's use of force, allowing it to use its military for the country's self-defense. The law, backed by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling coalition, is intended to strengthen Japan against the increasing security challenges posed by China's growing military strength and North Korea's ongoing threats. Japan's neighbors, including South Korea and China, have had their concerns about the law, given Japan's history of aggression in the region. And Seoul and Beijing will be keeping a close eye on Tokyo's next move.
Our government has maintained the position that Japan's security law should be dealt with in a transparent manner and allow Japan to contribute to regional peace and stability. With that in mind, we will be closely observing where Japan's security policy is heading.
In an online commentary, China's state-run Xinhua news agency said the new law only endangers the Japanese public's rights to live peacefully and that it poses a severe challenge to the already vulnerable peace in the Asia-Pacific region.
Japan and China's view has been excessively combative towards Beijing, so it's no wonder that it's criticizing the law. And South Korea has concerns that this kind of conflict will negatively affect the stability of the Korean peninsula.
Within Japan, opposition parties, which attempted to block the legislation last year, say the law is unconstitutional. And a public poll conducted by Tokyo-based Kyodo News last weekend found nearly 50% of respondents were not in favor of it. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Well, shifting gears, it looks like Korean consumers are beginning to feel better about the economy. The nation's Consumer Sentiment Index posted a rebound this month, meaning they could start to open up their wallets. Kim Jung-soo has more.
Korean consumer sentiment improved in March, shedding a more positive outlook on future circumstances. Data by the Bank of Korea showed the Consumer Sentiment Index reached 100, up 2 points from February. A reading of over 100 means optimists outweigh pessimists. The index had been on a decline for 3 straight months since last December, dropping from 102 to 98, as ongoing volatility in the global economy, mainly from China, had a negative impact on Korea's consumer behavior. But a number of factors have helped to finally boost household confidence. A recent climb in global crude oil prices have helped to stabilize financial markets. And the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision this month to postpone hiking its interest rates has also contributed to the positive outlook. But experts say they are not sure whether this upward trend will continue, as domestic events in the upcoming month of April could have a more definite impact on the national economy.
We have the general election coming up, and we also have ongoing household debt issues that have to be resolved. So I think that the index for April will be a more convincing indicator of consumer sentiment.
Markets will hold on to this rebound and wait for other data to show signs of economic improvement. That includes the outcome of the upcoming April 13th vote. Kim Jung-soo, Arirang News.
Korea will cut discretionary spending by government ministries and agencies by 10% next year. Now, this is part of a budget guideline passed in a cabinet meeting today. Our Hwang Ji-hye brings us up to date on the government's plan to restructure its expenditures to focus on creating new jobs and increasing the country's growth potential.
During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, the Korean government approved a budget guideline for next year that will cut discretionary spending by ministries and agencies by 10%. The savings will be used for projects to create jobs for young people and women and to foster new growth engines. In fact, a new survey requested by the Finance Ministry and conducted by Gallup Korea shows that more than a quarter of 1,000 people surveyed said the jobs sector is the most in need of fiscal spending. The Finance Ministry says, however, that the cut does not mean the government is trimming the budget as a whole. Rather, it's restructuring its spending to boost efficiency. Discretionary spending makes up around 50%, or roughly $175 billion of this year's roughly $330 billion budget. If the items that cannot be cut from discretionary spending, like labor, are subtracted, a cut of around $13 billion is expected in next year's budget. The budget restructuring comes amid lingering economic uncertainties at home and abroad, resulting in sluggish tax revenue, along with a rising demand for social welfare due to the aging population and a low birth rate. Each ministry will have to submit its budget plans by the end of May to the Finance Ministry. The Finance Ministry will then put it all together and conduct a review so it can submit the government's 2017 budget plan to the Parliament in early September. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the Korean government unveiled the 2017 budget guidelines today. It shows a 10% cut in discretionary spending, which the Finance Ministry says is intended to better focus its fiscal policy on job creation, particularly Korea's younger generation. As the government tries to do its part to tackle the country's high youth unemployment rate, Korea's young job seekers are taking the matter into their own hands to make the cut. How to tap into the job market, our news feature tonight with Lee-ji-won.
Kim So-yeon is in her final year of university, and aside from wrapping up her studies, every day she is busy preparing and planning for future employment. After lectures, she goes to Chinese and English academies. She's also part of a study group with other job seekers. Together, they compare notes and share information on company interviews and entrance exams.
The amount of competition there is for a job is fierce, so regardless of what the requirements are, we need to make ourselves more qualified and attractive to employers in order to have a better chance of landing a position.
A growing number of students, college grads, and young job seekers are finding their own ways to try and tackle the worsening unemployment problem they are facing. In February, Korea's youth unemployment rate hit 12.5%, marking a record high since data was first compiled in 1999. the number of unemployed between the ages of 15 to 29 stood at 560,000, up 76,000 compared to last year.
The biggest reason for this high unemployment rate is the imbalance between supply and demand in the youth labor market. There are now more highly educated students with university degrees, but there aren't that many good jobs, like at conglomerates and public enterprises, to accommodate them.
Amid such unfavorable conditions, young people are going beyond the extra mile to build up and perfect their resumes in a bid to woo potential employers. Kim Chae-won is a speech academy student who's trying to improve her interview skills.
목소리에 대한 느낌이 굉장히 크게 이미지로 남게 되어 있습니다.
Many get turned down in the interview stage, so I thought getting speech lessons would help me articulate my words better and improve my speaking skills so I act more confident and give a good first impression.
A survey of more than 500 people by Korean job search portals Haramin showed about 30% have taken or are currently taking additional job prep courses. About 70% have taken English or other language classes, while just under half underwent some type of certification training. These extras often come at a high price and don't ensure results.
Every month I spend more than $1,000 on job prep classes.
According to Saramin, young job seekers use 37% of their total living expenses on average to cover job preparation costs.
The biggest reason these classes are taken is to increase the chances of getting a job. Often it's quite effective because instructors know about interview patterns, tips, and questions on exams that will help students get good scores.
In spite of such effort, the youth unemployment rate is still high, and experts say companies and the government hold the key to alleviating the problem.
It's a problem that companies require specs that must be bought with money. There are young people who don't have the financial means to take these job prep courses, which means their ability to find employment will be much harder. Companies need to implement different processes, like blind screening, so a person's abilities and qualities are judged more fairly.
The expert added that changes like cutting back on long work hours and creating more positions to handle workloads can help create more open positions. For its part, the Korean government has increased its budget for next year to support businesses that create more jobs and offer vocational training for young job seekers in hopes of tackling the country's youth unemployment crisis. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
The U.S. Justice Department says the FBI has unlocked an iPhone used by one of the shooters in a fatal California rampage without the help of Apple. Bruce Harrison is live in the studio with me. Now, Bruce, what does this surprise announcement mean for the legal battle between the Justice Department and Apple?
Well, Kainang, it effectively ends the legal challenge between the two. So now that the Justice Department can access the phone's data, it's asked the court to withdraw an order compelling Apple to assist in bypassing the phone's encryption software. Apple said now for months that assisting the government would set a terrible precedent for privacy. And while it defied the order, a bunch of third parties came forward to help the FBI bypass iPhone encryption. Earlier this week, the FBI said it was hopeful the proposed technique could work, and it had exhausted all its own options before taking Apple to court.
Now people have come from all over the globe with suggestions, and we're going to see whether that works, because the goal was, and always will be, to try to investigate a terrorist attack in a competent way.
Monday's dismissal, though, is far from the end of the fight over encrypted information. The technology industry believes helping authorities bypass security of tech products will undermine security for everyone, while government officials insist criminal investigations would be hampered without access to phone data. In a rare act of violence in Taiwan, police have arrested a man suspected of beheading a 4-year-old girl on the street outside a Taipei metro station. Local media say the little girl was struggling with her bicycle when the man attacked. Her mother attempted to pull him off but failed.
My daughter was not where she should have been, or next to her bicycle, but lying on the ground.
An angry mob attacked the suspect as he was moved outside of a police station in Taipei. According to Taiwan's central news agency, police believe the attacker has a history of mental illness and drug abuse.
A very tragic and just outrageous story. Bruce, the killing has reignited a debate in Taiwan over the death penalty. What are people there saying?
Well, this is interesting because up to this point there's been a lot of protests to abolish the death penalty. It's legal in Taiwan, but now we're seeing a lot of people get on the internet and say that they should stop having those discussions in light of such a brutal crime.
Well, we'll have to keep an eye on how this story develops over there in Taiwan. Thank you so much for today.
My pleasure.
Well, it was a very mild day today, but a dusty one here in Seoul. For a weather update, let's go live to our Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center. Ji-hyun, I must confess to you, I came out of my house with a mask on.
Good idea, because warm southwesterly winds brought in warm air as well as dust, which hit very high levels in the most parts of the country, including here in the capital. And sadly, tomorrow's outlook doesn't seem to be too different from today. The level of fine dust will continue to be very high here in Seoul all day long tomorrow. Now, plenty of sunshine is in the forecast across the nation, and temperatures will remain above the seasonal averages, but a cool and breezy morning to start out, as the daily low here is Seoul and Daejeon kick off at 5 degrees Celsius, while Busan and Jeju start out at 11. And as for the daily highs, it's going to be as mild as today or above the today's temperature readings, as Daegu and Busan will be topping out at 22 and 19. Now, before I go, Deoksugung Palace, Seogodang, and Hamyeongjeon Hall are temporarily open to citizens, but only through this Sunday. A free tour service is offered from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., but you'll need to make reservations in advance via the website. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
And that is our broadcast on this last Tuesday of March. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you as always for staying with us, and we hope to see you right back here same time tomorrow on NewsCenter.